And that is where we start our conversation this morning on Standing on Guard. My guests are with me, Dr. Hassan Khannenje, Director, Horn Institute for Strategic Studies, Dr. Mustafa Ali, Conflict Resolution and Security Expert, Professor Noah Midamba, Professor Defense and Foreign Policy, and also VC KCA, and George Musamali, Security Expert. Thanks for making time for us this morning. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning. Good morning.
All right, let's start from Laikipia, and Prof, I'll start with you. What do you make of the back and forth? The security forces say that they did not shoot the animals intentionally. It was they were caught in the crossfire because the bandits were armed on the other side. The guys, the herders on the other side, say they were not armed. This was just execution of their own cattle. What do you make of this back and forth?
Trevor, it's really continue unfortunate situation that can easily be avoided. Mahatma Gandhi said anger and intolerance are the enemy of the correct understanding. And correct understanding is to being able to map out the need of the ranchers and the need of the pastoralist community, and not displacing their lifestyle by using guns. It's absolutely unnecessary and something that has to be corrected by government. And the people who did that need to be prosecuted.
Yeah, but the police insist that the herders were also armed, so they were also firing back.
Arm is not an answer. There is understanding, there is negotiation, there is tolerance on what security people need and what the local people need. That has to be done through conversation, through talking, not through killing.
Dr. Mustafa?
Trevor, I agree with Professor Midamba. The issue of responding with such force to the herders, even if they were armed, is something that has got to be investigated. And there are many ways to disarm people like that are herding their cows, even if they are herding their cows in a place where they are not supposed to be herding the cows. But here is the point, Trevor. Yeah. It is a systemic issue. It is a systemic issue in which the issue of ranching here and the needs of the herders, the community, that if we look really carefully, the land essentially used to belong to these communities, and they still consider the land as that land is theirs, and so in such times where they are unable to graze their cows in the remaining areas, they actually go into those ranches to get their pasture. But we said before that the existential challenge to this country is actually about land and historical injustices, not ISIS, not Al-Shabaab. And what we are seeing in Laikipia could easily become a huge problem that that challenges the existence of this country. Now, the issue of ranching here, and you can see that some are talking that the leases are coming to an end. How did those people who own basically half of Laikipia acquire that land? Even if they acquired that land 150 years ago, does it mean that those people who were there were considered as part of the vegetation and animals in Laikipia? There were people there. In the same manner that there are many people who came, whether they're European, and went into Maasai land and took land, hundreds of thousands of acres, without due regard to the people, the communities that were there. And this is where we are seeing a problem today. And here what we are saying, those leases are registered, so it is illegal for the ranchers to go in with their cows. But the issue of, again, how was that land acquired? Was it acquired legitimately by the ranchers? And again, here we are looking at the issues of legality, illegality, and legitimacy, and illegitimacy in the ownership of huge tracts of land, not just in Laikipia, but around the country.
Okay, Dr. Hassan?
Yeah, Trevor, what part of the problem that we have sometimes in this country is we wait to respond when there's tragedy. The truth about Laikipia is this conflict has been ongoing. Early this year, there were invasions, there were killings, there were murders. It has affected tourism, it has affected business of those people who are involved in those areas. And there are a number of things that we've never addressed as a country. The Maasais did not willingly sign and away their land, or the pastoral communities in particular, especially in the 1904 agreement, where apparently they agreed to vacate the Rift Valley and pave way for European settlement. They never had a say in it. And over time, even after independence, we never really addressed the problem that is facing us as a country. Now, having said that, it's also not proper, and the leadership of this country, and both the leadership of those communities and government, have to be aware that while we may assert certain rights and take certain action as communities out of sometimes desperation, because they need to graze the cattle gives them dignity. The cattle defines who they are. It's part of their culture. It's the same as what your profession gives to you, what your education gives to you. However, I don't think we should try to go the way of Zimbabwe, and we have seen what has happened. We also have to be measured in the way we react to these things. However, we shouldn't be waiting for tragedy before we react. We have to be proactive and be addressing this issue continuously, not occasionally, just when there's a problem. I think that's the way forward.
All right, George, you've been in the service before. What happens in this case? How come they just shot all the animals, and now there's a back and forth on who started the shooting? The police are saying it's the herders who provoked the shooting, but the animals were killed. Now police are saying it's 75. The herders are saying they're over 300. What happens that would provoke that kind of massive killing?
Trevor, let's look it from this angle. Let's not look at the legality of the herders being in Laikipia. But let's look at the strategy that was used by the security forces, because the police are saying they killed only 75. The herders are talking of about 350 herds of cattle. I'll go back to history. Though this is not the same as the scorched earth policy that was used by Napoleon and the Russians in the Russia campaign, that was in 1812. At some point they overlap. What we saw in Laikipia is punitive destruction of property by the security agencies. And you see, when you talk about the scorched earth policy, this is a military strategy that is aimed to destroy anything that might be of value to the enemy, whether in your own territory or in the enemy's territory. And this is done when you are advancing or withdrawing. But when it comes to punitive destruction of property, this is when you destroy property that is of indispensable value to the civilian population. And this is exactly what we witnessed in Laikipia. And remember, this is something that is prohibited under the Geneva Protocol of 1977. You are not allowed to destroy property for punitive, as a punitive measure that is useful to the civilian, be it livestock, be it foodstuff. And it's unfortunate that we are witnessing this in Kenya in 2017. And this is not the first time that we've seen this kind of measure being taken. In 1984, during the infamous Operation Nyundo, we saw a similar kind of thing happening. But during that time, livestock was not killed. Livestock was confiscated from the Pokot, headed to a same point, and then it was a measure of telling the Pokot, you need to move out of Trans Nzoia by the military and the police. That was the strategy that was used then. But I think up to date, from 1984 to now, what we witnessed in Laikipia, this is a wrong strategy. You don't just move people by punishing them, destroying property and calling this as a military or a security operation. We've seen killings in Laikipia. A few months ago, the deputy commandant of the anti-stock theft unit and 6 of his officers were killed by the herders, and we were told these are bandits. So do we differentiate between the bandits and the herders? And if they are armed, there are better ways of policing them. We disarm them. I mean, this is a police strategy that has been used before, and it has been successful. So whoever was in charge of this operation actually lacked intact, and he decided to use a wrong system of dealing with the situation that was on the ground in Laikipia. I believe that is that's where I stand. Okay.
Professor, in the heat of the moment, and we're talking about disarming here, but then you're confronted with a group of people, some of them call herders, others call bandits, but they're shooting at you and they're in a field. What would be the best response by the police officers? Because you can almost not differentiate, assuming their story is right, that there were shots coming from the other side and they're using the animals as shield. How would they respond at that particular point?
Trevor, the situation is much more complex than the police case. There is a requirement of political leadership, community leadership. Police need to be part of that whole package of conversation that lead to harmonizing the need of the, like my colleagues have stated very clearly, and historical issues. The need of the ranchers and the need of the community need to be harmonized. Yeah. But it cannot be done through guns. There is reasons why the herders have guns. They're protecting the animal. And times and times again, their need is to have access to water and access to grazing. Now, these thousands and thousands of acres of land, can there be a situation where there will be an opening so that people can bring their cattle to have water, and then in a very dry situation have the ability to have grazing in certain control area? That can be done. But we cannot go around because somebody is armed, then you have to shoot. That is the end, you know, like George clearly said. The UN Convention, the US Protocol, all civil, you know, security issues. There is a dialogue. It's done through dialogue. Mm-hmm. So gun is not the answer.
Okay. Dr. Mustafa, is that the same approach you take from a conflict resolution angle?
Yeah, it is a conflict, and it is a the land issue in Laikipia and many other parts of the country has become a serious conflict. Now, most people don't consider it as a serious conflict because it's been left to, you know, it's festering. Yeah. It comes, it's on and off. We see it coming up and to a situation of hurting stalemate when there is drought. The grazers need land, and then they get into those ranches, or rather pasture, they get into those ranches to graze their cattle and then move back. Now, we just had a prolonged drought early this year, and so they stayed there for longer. And the fact that there is a conflict there means that it should be transformed, Trevor. Now, that conflict has not been transformed. It was not resolved during the colonial time. When Kenya got independence, it was not resolved. There have been attempts to transform that particular conflict. It has not worked. There are reports about these particular pieces of land in Laikipia and indeed many other parts of the country, and recommendations on how to resolve the issues that surround land, ranches, land tenure and all that. Yeah. Those have not been implemented. The Ministry of Lands just the other day came up with another committee to try and address those issues. But the issues are there, they're clear. We know who the actors are. It's just that we do not want to address those problems because we will have to dig into the past where we have, we somehow fear to get into the Pandora's box of historical injustices. And Trevor, if we really have to address this problem that poses, the land problem that poses an existential threat to this country, we have to get into that Pandora's box, get everything out in a manner that is going to help transform the lives of everybody in this country.
Okay. Dr. Hassan, these solutions we're talking about, should the police even be involved then in that case? Because if we need to open the Pandora's box like Dr. Mustafa is saying, then why should we have lethal force there? Should it just be between the leaders and the ranchers, and then they can implement what Professor is saying, routine grazing and routine watering of the animals?
Yeah, because conflict resolution is not a one-day event. It's a process. It takes time. It takes change in attitude. It takes commitment. Yeah. And two wrongs do not make a right. Now, one principal function of government or the security apparatus is to protect the lives and the property of Kenyans, but not destroy it. Now, if you find yourself in a position where the police, for instance, have to destroy property and on claims or allegations of protecting themselves against, herders perhaps who are also armed, and for obvious reasons, as Professor said, they're trying to protect their own property, which also raises another question, because why do they need guns to protect their own property? In part because they don't trust the security for their properties guaranteed by the state. So that's another question that has to be taken care of. However, a conversation has to start taking place. We cannot run away from the past. Someone once said that the past is not done, it's not even past yet, because if we can't learn from the history, we are condemned to repeat it. And for the current problems, Laikipia problem is just one of the many problems Kenya is facing right now. And it's not going to go away, because these herders are still going to need grazing land. These ranchers still need to protect their own ranches and businesses, because they're also good for tourism for the country. Let's not forget that. However, unless we start a conversation, put in place structures and a commitment from all parties involved, both community leaders and government, and even the civil society, have a serious conversation on how to address this problem, it's not likely to go away. I'm just hoping that everybody who is listening right now is paying attention, and that we can actually start a conversation about it.
All right. George, now that you're the only ex-serviceman here, what happens in this? Is it a failure in command structure, or is it just that people decide arbitrarily when they're in the field that these guys are armed, let's just shoot?
Trevor, if I look at Laikipia, I think what happened was done purely for strategic political reasons, rather than strategic operation reasons. This is purely politics we're witnessing in Laikipia. Because the police have their SOPs when it comes to dealing with these kind of situations. And nowhere in the books does it tell you to go and kill property that belongs to a community. This is a civilian population. We're not talking about armed militia groups that we are dealing with here. And these people were in Laikipia purely to look for pasture, and it did not happen yesterday. And if you look at the ranches there was an agreement, from what I've gathered, between the herders and the owners of these ranches, that for this period of time, we're going to herd our animals, we're going to water our animals in these ranches until such a time that we're going to have rain in our areas, then we'll move these animals out of this place. And this is exactly what was going to happen in the near future, because now the rains are there, and the herders were willing to move their animals from the ranches. And in come the police. They use lethal force against the animals. I remember when you talk about the animal, the herders using the animals as a shield, we're not experiencing this for the first time. Remember, we've had this kind of conflicts in the Pokot area, and Trans Nzoia was affected very much. I remember Trans Nzoia is the basket food of Kenya, and the government in 1984 wanted to remove the herders from Trans Nzoia, from the ADC farms in Jabata, ADC farms in Chipchoina, and some kind of force had to be used. And what I said is that the animals were all herded together and moved out by the security agencies. We did not see them shooting at the animals and killing them. We did not see the military killing the civilian population purely for the purpose of removing the animals from these ADC farms. So whoever was in charge of this operation in Laikipia, I believe he wanted to use a short, quick way of dealing with a problem that cannot be dealt with like that. As we've said, this conflict has been there for quite some time, and dialogue needs to be used between the herders and the ranchers and the government, because we are talking about the historical injustices. The Maasai did not willingly vacate this land, and they still believe historically this is our land, and we have all the rights to use this land in whichever way we want. I
want us to wrap up this conversation before I take a break. But Professor, we are talking about compensation here. Should they be compensated? And how will that be done if they can't even agree on the numbers to begin with? The police say they're 75, the herders say they're over 300.
There must be a number. There must be someone who can document exactly what happened. There is a process to validate who is saying what. And Trevor, this is their livelihood. This is what they live on every day. It's like you are going to work and expecting salary. It's like somebody investing his money and expecting return. When you wipe all that out, what do you expect out of this person? So this is, we have a law and order society. That's what we're aiming for. When ill is affected to one person, it affects all of us. It is the society. It is the base of understanding. It is who we are. So there must be a process to conclude and harmonize this issue. Like what we are saying, it's a complex historical issue. It cannot be solved through the gun. And therefore, we need to learn something out of it. But we need to be able to leave the pasture community that someone cares, that there is a government who protects every single person in Kenya. That is what is needed right now.
Dr. Mustafa, how do we go about this compensation issue?
It's a tough one, Trevor, beyond livelihood that Professor Midamba has talked about. And there should be some kind of a form of compensation in order for those who have lost their animals not to suffer beyond what they have suffered. But the issue here that will actually not be compensated is that cows is part of the identity of the Maasai people and the pastoralists. That cannot be compensated. The only way that can be dealt with is if that particular conflict is actually transformed, there are ways that the pastoralists go around their issues culturally. And we need to understand that those who are responsible should apologize. Even as we think about how best we are going to transform this conflict to the benefit of both the herders and the ranchers.
All right. Dr. Hassan?
Yeah, you mentioned that how can we discuss about compensation when there is no agreement?
The numbers are conflicting, yes.
And as they say, you know, there is your story, there is my story, and there is the truth. So there is a number there that is actually true that we can be able to investigate. Now, as Dr. Mustafa just mentioned, at some point in the early 60s, Dr. Martin Luther King said, nobody's a nobody, everybody's a somebody. Animals and cows and cattle make these communities into a somebody. Taking them away makes them into a nobody. And anytime we convert somebodyness into nobodyness, it becomes extremely dangerous. And I think we should take the lesson from that.
Dr. George?
I think compensation is going to be a tall order because this is not, we are not experiencing this the first time. Up to date, after Operation Nyundo, the Pokots are still demanding for compensation from the government. I think this is going to be a legal issue. And remember, I've talked about the Geneva Convention of 1977. And if the herders feel aggrieved, then they can ask for redress not only from the local courts, the UN can be drawn in because what we witnessed is actually not right. And the numbers are there because the Maasais or the pastoralists are the owners of the animals. They know what they have lost. Vis-a-vis what the government is saying, they only killed 75. Even 75, looking at the strategy that was used, is a big number. Remember, the police are not there to destroy property. The police are there to protect property. And I believe somebody should be held responsible for this, Trevor. And the TJRC report should be implemented. If we need to have a permanent solution to this. Remember, these people are being armed. It's only the other day that we saw certain populations in the Rift Valley being armed by the government in the name of police reservists. Are these the same guns that we are seeing being used in Laikipia? That is something that we need to question. Because it's not easy to have a population moving around with guns in a country that is well policed. So it means there's a gap somewhere in security that allows people to illegally own arms and move around with these guns in areas that are supposed to be actually under control of the government security operators. So this compensation thing is not going to happen now, because I've said historically we've seen this happening before and we've never seen anybody being compensated. I think the solution to this is political.
Prof, I want us to move away from the Laikipia issue and talk about the Mandera issue after the break. But before we do that, Papillon here on Twitter says, why are the panelists not talking about the incitement of herders by local leaders? And who supplies firearms to these herders anyway? I'll let you all respond to that very briefly before I take a break. Incitement by political leaders, and he's wondering who is arming these herders to begin with. How come we're not interrogating that?
But, you know, we Kenyans have a tendency to have quick fix, quick answer. And quick answer is to blame someone else. we're talking about fundamental of what created the historical issues that created what's happening.
Yeah.
We are not talking about who harmed who. Get to the fundamental if we are interested in solving this case once and for all. But we cannot solve it by blaming people.
Right.
That is the issue.
Okay. Dr. Mustafa?
Yeah, it is true that there are some people that have incited the pastoralists for certain political reasons. There are those who are really working for the ranchers for certain economic reasons and interest. Now, all that will not help in resolving the problem of land in this country. Okay. There must be a third uninterested party or impartial party that will look at those interests, put them on the table and say, you know, which are the core issues here that we need to address in order to redress the historical issues as claimed by the most of the pastoralist communities. And those who came and got this land, obviously they have interest there. Can their interest be taken care of? And that is the only way that we can have a win-win situation out of this mess.
Dr. Hassan?
Yeah, I think it's not entirely true that we haven't really mentioned the responsibility of the local leaders, because we have right on this table that they have. But we also have to be cognizant of the fact that there will always be political profiteers who want profit from a crisis, or who want to, in order to gain up support, to fire up their base, so they can look more popular. But these are just proximate things, they're not the underlying factors. Now here we're examining more underlying factors that have actually informing the current crisis that we're through.
All right, George?
I believe what we witnessed there, the way the police reacted, brings to mind that there's a belief that that invention was incited by politicians. And this is why the police went there with the mindset that these people have been incited, and by hook or crook we have to move them out of these ranches. And I think that is where we fail as a community, because we are talking about the communities or the herders being armed. We have been having a problem of proliferation of small arms from the neighboring countries for a long time. This is not happening just right now. And I've mentioned that to deal with this, at some point the government decided to arm people they called police reservists. And